Particular, Canada will continue to seek strong relationships both with Mexico and the United States for the benefit.
Well, despite being the third party in the current CUSMA agreement, there will be no bilateral trade agreement with Mexico. But Ottawa says it is pushing forward to strengthen trade ties with the country.
Tonight, Canadians are bracing for major economic disruption as a full-scale trade war with the United States becomes a reality. South of the border, the U.S. national debt has just soared past a staggering $37 trillion, an all-time high that highlights just how serious the situation has become. Inflation is hitting hard, steadily eroding the value of workers' paychecks. And what was supposed to be a straightforward international showdown, one Washington expected to win with ease, has taken a surprising turn. The trade dynamics across North America aren't just shifting, they're unraveling. In just a few short months, the US has stumbled into a perfect economic storm. A debt crisis spiraling out of control, prices climbing sharply across the board, and a supposed underdog, Canada, holding strong in ways no one anticipated. If such a dramatic reversal can unfold this quickly, it raises real concerns about what other shocks could be lurking just around the corner. And there's a hidden force driving this entire chain reaction. We'll uncover it later in this video, so be sure to stick around. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps us beat the algorithm and reach more viewers like you. What makes this moment so remarkable is that a strategy designed to cement American dominance is now backfiring. The first major strike in this trade war came in the form of sweeping 35% tariffs, launched under former President Donald Trump. The goal was to force Canada into submission. Instead, it set off a domino effect that Washington never saw coming. Rather than buckle, Canada has used the crisis to strengthen its own economic footing. Ships carrying goods that once headed straight for US ports are now rerouting through Canadian channels, bypassing American soil entirely. Major US corporations that once dominated cross-border commerce are scrambling to rework supply chains, now increasingly reliant on Canadian railways, ports, and access to Canadian markets just to stay operational. In trying to isolate Canada, Washington has inadvertently pushed key parts of the US economy closer to it. A shift no one in the White House intended. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It's the best way to stay informed as this story develops. And incredibly, that first wave of tariffs was just the beginning. What followed has been even more disruptive. The twin forces of tariffs and inflation are hammering the US economy from both sides. The new 35% duties on Canadian goods, along with similar levies on imports from other nations, are rippling through supply chains, driving up costs for everything from manufacturing parts to everyday groceries. These aren't temporary spikes. These cost increases are becoming entrenched in the prices of countless goods and services. Companies now face a tough choice: absorb the costs and take a hit to profits, or pass them on to consumers and risk losing business. Many are doing a bit of both, and it's already showing up in stores, restaurants, and utility bills across the country. For regular Americans, the strain is everywhere. A simple grocery run or hardware store visit costs noticeably more than it did just a few months ago. Filling up the car or paying monthly energy bills has become a stress point for families already stretched thin. Paychecks that once felt sufficient now struggle to keep pace with rising prices. As people cut back on spending, buying cheaper alternatives, postponing major purchases, or canceling travel plans, the ripple effects spread. Retailers see softer sales and reduce their orders. Factories respond by slowing production, delaying expansion, and bracing for uncertain demand. Small businesses, from local diners to dry cleaners, are seeing fewer customers and responding by cutting hours or pausing new hires. The once strong labor market, with its low unemployment and ample job opportunities, is starting to show cracks. Job growth has slowed. In industries hit hardest by import costs, quiet layoffs have begun as companies fight to remain profitable. Meanwhile, US exporters are facing their own set of challenges. As prices rise and trade relationships break down, foreign buyers are turning elsewhere. long-established US export markets are slipping away as overseas clients find suppliers in Europe, Asia, and beyond, companies offering similar goods at lower prices and with more stable trade terms. This shift is costing American factories orders they once took for granted, and it's eating into the future prospects of key industries like agriculture, machinery, and technology, adding yet another layer of stress to an already struggling economy. The result is clear. The US economy is under immense pressure. But this isn't your typical downturn, one that can be eased with interest rate adjustments or a quick cash injection. This is a deeper, grinding economic squeeze that's changing how the system operates at a fundamental level. And here's the striking part. Much of the current pain is self-inflicted. The hardship facing American families and businesses today is largely the consequence of policy decisions made in Washington. In trying to wield tariffs as a tool of economic pressure, the US may have unintentionally done serious harm to its own economy. To understand how we got here, we need to look closely at those decisions and their fallout. It all began with one pivotal moment. After months of tough rhetoric and failed last-minute talks, the US government pulled the trigger on a sweeping ultimatum in early August 2025. Overnight, Canadian exports not covered by the USMCA, the trade pact that replaced NAFTA, were hit with a steep 35% tariff. The official justification came with high drama. US leaders accused Canada of enabling fentanyl trafficking and linked the country to America's opioid crisis. They also voiced strong objections to Canada's diplomatic recognition of a Palestinian state. But behind the tough talk was a risky economic gamble. And it's becoming increasingly clear that the bet may not pay off. In Washington's version of events, the tariffs were a bold and necessary step to protect American security and values. The assumption was simple: hit Canada hard and fast, and the country would be left with no choice but to return to the negotiating table, desperate for a deal on American terms. But that's not what happened. Canada didn't cave in fact, it stood firm. Prime Minister Mark Carney, a seasoned former central banker known for his calm and strategic mindset, didn't mince words. He expressed strong disappointment with the US decision and made it clear that Canada would not be pressured into a one-sided agreement. Any deal with Washington, he insisted, must reflect Canada's long-term interests, not just serve as a band-aid to end the standoff. That moment of defiance proved to be a turning point. It took the air out of Washington's pressure campaign and exposed a critical flaw in the strategy: the belief that Canada was too weak to hold out. What followed was a case study in unintended consequences. The very country targeted by these tariffs, Canada, adapted swiftly, and the country imposing them, the United States, started to feel the blowback. The tariffs, intended as a tool of leverage, ended up causing collateral damage on both sides. US officials may have expected a show of strength to break Canada's resistance, but instead, it exposed just how risky and unpredictable economic coercion can be, even with an ally. Which leads to a bigger question. Who is really paying the price for this trade war? Sure, the tariffs have Canada's name on them, but the side effects may be hitting America even harder. Meanwhile, Canada wasn't just reacting, it was recalibrating. Faced with a wall of tariffs, Canadian leaders moved quickly to minimize exposure and seize new opportunities. What began as an emergency response evolved into a bold and strategic repositioning. Rather than retreat, Canada accelerated efforts to diversify its trade relationships, reaching beyond its giant neighbor to build stronger ties with new partners around the world. What started as a defensive move soon became a blueprint for economic transformation. Canada is, in effect, redrawing the trade map of North America, this time with itself at the center. For decades, Canadian exports naturally flowed south into the US, but now those routes are being redirected. Goods that once crossed the US border are increasingly finding new markets overseas or traveling via different corridors altogether. To support this shift, Canada is heavily investing in its infrastructure. Ports along both coasts are being expanded. Rail networks and highways are being upgraded. The goal is clear: build a modern trade network that doesn't rely on passing through the United States. This growing independence is quietly reducing America's economic leverage. Every new trade deal Canada signs, every port it modernizes, and every new logistics partnership it forms chips away at the historic dependency on U.S. trade routes. In a surprising reversal, U.S. companies are now the ones adapting to Canada's systems, not the other way around. The longer this standoff continues, the more deeply rooted these new trade patterns become. And the harder it will be to return to the old status quo. This shift is already having real implications for American businesses. Car manufacturers, for instance, who once relied on parts flowing through traditional US hubs, now find themselves dependent on ports like Vancouver or Montreal. Retailers looking to restock shelves must increasingly go through Canadian intermediaries or alternate paths. Across industries, from agriculture to auto manufacturing, US firms are waking up to a new reality. Canada is no longer just a regional partner. It's now a central player whose cooperation can't be taken for granted. That shift in dynamics is tilting the balance of power. Canada's influence is growing, both in trade negotiations and in corporate boardrooms. Meanwhile, the once dominant American position is beginning to show signs of strain. For US companies, this is unfamiliar territory. They now have to pay closer attention to Canadian regulations, logistics, and policy decisions just to maintain smooth operations. And the longer the tariff conflict drags on, the more these new habits harden into lasting norms. With each passing week, supply chains grow more integrated with Canada and more independent of traditional US control. One of the core reasons Canada is gaining ground so effectively comes down to one word: alliances. And the most important alliance reshaping the continent right now is with Mexico. Instead of waiting for tensions with the US to blow over, Canada and Mexico have started working more closely together to protect their shared economic interests. It's as if the two smaller players in North America decided to team up to counter the unpredictability of the largest. Top officials from both countries have been in constant talks, traveling back and forth to lay the groundwork for deeper integration. They're coordinating major infrastructure projects, expanding ports, and connecting rail lines to move goods between each other more efficiently, even creating routes that bypass the US entirely when necessary. They're also joining forces on energy initiatives, knowing that a reliable energy partnership could shield both countries if the US continues to rock the boat. The idea is simple. If Washington is going to be unpredictable, Canada and Mexico will support each other and make sure they're not left vulnerable. This cooperation gives both nations a stronger hand and reduces the chances that either can be economically isolated by American trade tactics in the future. By expanding their partnerships and backing each other economically, Canada and Mexico are reducing the risk of being individually pressured by US policies. In essence, both Ottawa and Mexico City are sending a clear message. North American trade doesn't have to run solely through Washington. This growing collaboration between the two neighbors marks a major shift in a region where, for decades, almost everything flowed through the United States. It's a strategic adjustment to a changing reality. If access to the US becomes limited or too expensive, Canada and Mexico are making sure there's another path open between them. Now, we come to the behind-the-scenes factor we mentioned earlier, the unexpected force powering Canada's new strategy. It turns out one of Canada's biggest secret weapons isn't military or political, it's financial. More specifically, it's about where Canada chooses to invest its money. Enter the Maple 8, Canada's 8 largest public pension funds. Together, they control over 2 trillion Canadian dollars in assets, making them some of the most influential institutional investors in the world. And as this trade storm unfolds, they've quietly turned their attention south, to Mexico. In recent months, the Maple 8 have started investing in large-scale infrastructure projects in Mexico that could reshape trade across the continent. The plans being considered are ambitious. Major upgrades to Mexico's Pacific and Atlantic ports to handle increased cargo traffic, much of which used to go through US ports. There's talk of building new rail lines and highways that would connect Mexican industries directly to Canada, forming a new north-south trade corridor that bypasses the US entirely. These pension giants are also eyeing Mexico's energy sector, from oil and gas infrastructure to power grids, investments that would tie the two countries' energy supplies more closely together. These are the kinds of long-term, high-impact projects that only investors with deep pockets and strategic vision can fund. And Canada's pension funds are leaning in. The plan is bold: build a new backbone for North American commerce that runs from Mexico through Canada, one where US involvement is optional, not required. If this vision becomes reality, we could soon see cargo ships from Asia unloading at Mexican ports, with goods traveling by rail straight into Canada. No stopovers in the US, no delays at American customs. It's a dramatic shift that would give Canada and Mexico far more control over their trade destinies. In short, Canada is not just relying on policy. It's putting real money behind a strategy to become more self-reliant, building a parallel trade network that cushions it against political turbulence in Washington. We're already seeing early signs of this shift. A new North American framework is beginning to take shape, where the US is no longer the sole hub of the system. Trade between Canada and Mexico is growing, and it's becoming more direct. Increasingly, Mexican goods are making their way to Canadian markets without passing through the US, and vice versa. Energy cooperation is deepening too. Canadian firms are investing in Mexican oil production and renewables, while Mexico explores long-term agreements to import Canadian natural gas and energy tech. Financial ties are strengthening as well. Canadian banks and businesses are expanding in Mexico, and Mexican companies are finding new partners in Canada. All of this acts as a safety net. If one trade route closes, another is ready to keep goods moving. Strategically, this sends a clear message to Washington. Canada and Mexico have options. The US is no longer the only gateway to continental trade. That doesn't mean the US is being pushed out. It still plays a massive role. But the days of being the unavoidable middleman are fading. Power in North American trade is beginning to balance out, and Canada is emerging with a stronger hand than ever before. One area where Canada's advantage is quietly growing, even if it's not making headlines, is energy. This has become Canada's silent ace in the hole. Why? Because the United States depends heavily on Canadian oil to keep its economy running. Canada is the largest foreign supplier of crude oil to the US, making up a huge portion of what American refineries rely on daily. Millions of barrels of Canadian crude flow south through pipelines every day, directly into the heart of the US energy system. In many cases, US refineries are specifically built to process Canada's heavier oil from the oil sands. If that flow were ever disrupted, or even slowed significantly, those refineries would struggle to find a replacement. The result? A sudden, sharp supply crunch in the American energy market. That's a reminder. While trade routes, investments, and infrastructure are being reshaped, energy remains a powerful form of leverage, and one that Canada holds in abundance. Please subscribe to the Timefold channel, and don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps us grow and bring you more in-depth analysis like this.